The 11th chapter of the Gospel of John is complex and layered. It's familiar to you even if you don't immediately recognize it. It contains one of the most memorable and portable passages in all of the Bible. Here's the context. A close friend of Jesus named Lazarus is near death. His sisters, Mary and Martha, who are familiar biblical characters to us and close friends of Jesus, request that he come and help. But Jesus delays. And when he finally arrives, it's too late, and his friend Lazarus has died. And Jesus cried. John 11:35, Jesus wept. Today, we will use this rich and enriching 11th chapter of John's Gospel for context and instruction on how to care for others and how to care for ourselves in the midst of a crisis. But first, let's pray. Speak to us, O God. Draw near to us, and thereby draw us near to one another. Amen. 6 weeks ago today, on a beautiful Palm Sunday afternoon, 14 young men, all seniors at the University of Minnesota and housemates, stood in a circle on the front lawn of their house. Their friend was near death. He had been rushed to the hospital and immediately put on a ventilator with what was assumed to be COVID-19. One of his housemates is a member of Wayzata Community Church, and his parents asked if I would go down to campus to pray with the boys and to share a few words of encouragement. As we stood in a circle, standing 6 feet apart, many of us wearing makeshift masks, I asked them to memorize a Bible verse from John chapter 11, verse 35. Those two famous words, Jesus wept. And I told them why Jesus cried. It was because his friend had died. I hoped to give them permission to share whatever emotions they were feeling. I have used that passage in many funerals over the years, but it landed differently on this day because their friend was still alive and they weren't ready to cry just yet. There are many similarities between that day at the U on Palm Sunday and the events of John chapter 11 in the town of Bethany nearly 2,000 years ago. Someone was near death, and no one knew exactly what to do or how to feel. A house on campus was afflicted, and the name of the town, Bethany, means literally house of affliction. Everyone had different ideas about why this was happening, and people in both times and in both places came together for the purpose of caring for one another. The humanity of the students was evident in the crisis, and the humanity of Jesus was evident as well. He wept. Through the events of John chapter 11 and Jesus' example in it, we can glean a model for caring during a crisis. In this model of Jesus, we see three important parts of what it might mean, what it might look like to care during a crisis. 1, we have to know our limitations. 2, we have to be honest with ourselves and with others. And 3, always offer hope. Let's take those one at a time. First, coming face to face with our own limitations is one of the hardest and most humbling experiences in life. For Jesus, this was a moment when something was happening and he couldn't stop it. His friend Lazarus was dying. And whether Jesus didn't want to stop it or wasn't even able to stop it is irrelevant. He was limited. He was limited in time, limited in knowledge, and limited in understanding. He didn't have enough time to get to Lazarus. He didn't have enough knowledge as to what was really going on. And he was limited in his understanding. He could only point others to what he believed God would use this for. How often are we faced with our own limitations of things like time and knowledge and understanding, but instead choose to fight against them and resist? As Jesus displayed in the limitations he experienced in John chapter 11, moments of crisis, it's important for us to face our limitations, to hold that tension created by those limitations so that we might be what people need more than anything else in times of crisis, a non-anxious and non-urgent presence. Right now, we all feel the limitations imposed by this crisis. So let's face them and let's embrace them as the first step in caring for others and caring for ourselves. Secondly, in caring during times of crisis, it's critical that we be honest with ourselves and with others. This honesty must include emotional honesty. Verse 33 in John 11 tells us that Jesus was greatly disturbed and deeply moved, and then 2 verses later is when Jesus wept. In a very real, honest moment, Jesus is both mad and sad. He's mad at the sisters for questioning his love for their brother, and he's mad at the people for questioning why he couldn't save Lazarus since he had performed so many other miracles. But in the most emotionally honest moment in all the Gospels, Jesus is just sad. So he weeps. It is in and through this kind of honesty that we are able to care not only for others, but also to care for ourselves. I have heard it said that enlightenment is knowing where we are and telling the truth about it. Honesty is the path to enlightenment, the state of mind in which we can best serve. The third and final thread that we can pull from the tapestry that is the 11th chapter of John is the thread of hope. Once we face our limitations, are honest with ourselves and others, then we are in a position to offer hope to all. Once again, Jesus offers a model in the hope that he provides in just one small step at a time, from suffering to hope. First, Jesus instructs them to take away the stone. Although Lazarus has by then been dead for 4 days, there is just enough hope to take this first step. Then Jesus commands Lazarus to come out. And with vivid imagery, Lazarus comes forth with his hands and feet bound and his face wrapped in grave clothes. A miracle. Finally, Jesus says to them, unbind him and let him go. The final step in the restoration of hope. The raising of Lazarus is not only a model for what it looks like to offer help to others, it is in and of itself a source of hope for all of us. For we are all assured the same things as Lazarus and eventually of Jesus, new life, life after death, life beyond measure. As Jesus himself said in the previous chapter, life abundant. The place and purpose of hope in the midst of crisis cannot be overstated, and it is beautifully captured in Romans 5. Suffering produces endurance. Endurance produces character. Character produces hope, and hope never disappoints. Caring for others and caring for ourselves in a crisis begins by facing our limitations. It requires honesty with ourselves and with others, and it finds purpose as we offer hope to the world. When Jesus wept that day in Bethany for Lazarus, the people said, "Look how he loved him." The Greek word for love in that verse is not the typical agape love, but philia, which is a love between friends. Now, speaking of friends who love and care for each other in a crisis, like those young men who gathered in a circle on Palm Sunday, I'm so pleased to tell you that their friend who almost died, who was rushed from campus to the hospital and spent more than a month in the ICU and on a ventilator. He went home just last Monday and is expected to make a full recovery. May we all care and be cared for in these days. Thanks be to God.